I'm kind of a very rooted person, as you can imagine, because I've always lived in Queens. I've traveled to 60 countries, not on my own dime, but because I've been a travel writer. Is that okay? Okay. So I feel like a lot about immigration is not just moving from one country to another. Sometimes staying within a country and traveling. So I'm going to start with some local things, some Queensy poems. And I want to thank Wendy, first of all, for inviting me. This is such a fabulous venue. And I'm playing with this mic, sorry. Okay, I think we're okay. Since you asked, I am from dank wine cellars in South Jamaica, from cousins named Johnny, Joey, Nicky, Frankie, who harvested Queen's grapes. I am from a line of women sporting artichoke haircuts and pink collars. I am also from a Carmine Street tenement that lost its address in the last century. I am from the mind of a man who sent other men to the moon, from a red-shingled house that echoed with 3 languages at once. I'm from a bar in Marseille, a meadow in Molise, but most of all, I'm from 116th Drive off Sutphen and Foch Boulevards, from a zebra-colored neighborhood where everyone called my grandmother Mama, where cornrows were everywhere, but never in fashion. I'm from tomato and basil plants strung low with rainbow-colored yarns leaning sideways in damp summer soil. I'm from gnarled hands that sew and tailor, iron and wash, cook and make all the places I come from. So I do travel the subway a lot, and I have to say that the conversations are thinning out because people are on their phones or they're texting. So I'm missing a lot of conversation. But this is one of them. This is one of the pieces that Wendy referred to. The same. I want to tell the little Chinese women with the loud voices to sit beside each other so they don't shout across the subway car, over my head, shattering my space. I offer my seat. The lady with the short-cropped perm, red as a rooster's comb in a Chinese market, gives me a toothy grin, the essence of onion and garlic, shakes her head from side to side like a Tai Chi exercise, as if to say, no, no, no. I may shop in Costco, wear jeans, a North Face jacket, but you'll never make me a Westerner. Won't drop my Chinese voice a single decibel to suit you and your Anglo-Saxon and your Anglo-silence on subway cars, as if they were chapels or private property. I hear my grandmother's staccato calabrese vowels clang against the brick walls in an alleyway in Queens, with the same defiance, the same pride, the same sorrow to be in America. And some people think that's an anti-America poem, but it's not actually. No one actually ever wants to leave home, I think. This piece came from a story my mother told. When she went to high school, she graduated high school. That was a big deal if you were born in 1919. And she was looking for her first job. And she went with her friend, and this is what they found. Named for royalty. My mother named me Mafalda, Yolanda, Margarita, the names of all the king's daughters. I just hated it. There I was, sewing buttons on cardboard squares, which probably you've never seen this, 40 cents for 144, and named for royalty. I remember the shop I went to for my first job. It was down some steps on South Street, like a dungeon. All the girls at the machines were wearing their underwear and skimpy blouses. I was so proud of my diploma, how smart I was, and all the floor man wanted was to see me in my underwear. So some things haven't changed. And this is one of those pieces that I stole because I was sitting next to this little girl in a bagel shop. Bagel shop, Astoria, Queens. Her grandmother's silver braid brushes my back. We are that close in the Broadway bagel shop. Her shoulders slump inside a ruffled polyester blouse, that's no match for the loomed cotton ones with hand-crocheted collars she left in Puebla. I turn my head, look over her shoulder into the sharp eyes in the copper mestiza face that belonged to her granddaughter, smiling, a wide grin, as she demonstrates to Abuelita how one chews an American big as a flying saucer bagel, oozing with cream cheese, managing to keep the queso off her shirt and table. I love watching people trying to Americanize, or what they think is Americanizing. And this is indeed a subway poem. Solitude. In a city of 10 million, easy. Scope a corner seat on the subway next to a wall or window. Hunker down into the orange curve that hugs your butt. Lean into the synthetic wall that chills your shoulder. Rolling on board with a snoring baby in a stroller. A Mexican family sits beside me. The adolescent watches me, divines the mystery of American body language. I join them. I eavesdrop on his parents' Spanish exchange, note his edgy English responses, so anxious to leave them behind. And I think that's one of those things that happens with kids coming here. First generation, you want to answer your parents in English. You sort of want a little distance. And this was a piece, I went to the Museum of the Moving Image, and there was a director from Poland who was describing his experience coming to America and living in Greenpoint, which is pretty Polish. Polish interrupted. Their necks rose with voices that bellowed at weddings and wakes, with songs from the old country. From Warsaw and Krakow, they arrived in Greenpoint. An uninterrupted Polish experience. They walked arm in arm, men with men, women with women, ate their kielbasa, pierogis, drank vodka and beer, danced the polka, held candles in St. Stanislaus vigils. Now they drive American cars. They wear white collared shirts. My friends don't sing anymore, he said. First they forgot the words, and then the melodies. So I grew up in a neighborhood that was actually totally African American, except for my family and my friend's family around the corner. And here's a little bit. I hope this brings you to like the 1959 or something in South Jamaica. Cornrows. Cheryl's cornrows crisscross her round head that tops her dark Trinidadian neck. Her mother jellycoats her coffee-colored fingers to move rapid and sure through nappy, crinkled hair. She pulls one rope of hair over the other, over the other, over the other, until the braids are locked down tight with barrettes, ribbons, bows. Around the corner at Jean's beauty parlor, white women plop into wide leather chairs as metallic chemicals crimp and whip their soft hair into prim Tootsie Roll curls. Across the street, Sylvia's is crammed, arm to shiny bronze arm, with black women pressing their hair, making it straight, shiny, smooth as seals. Take the nap out. Cheryl and I watch Angela Davis, who never lived in Queens, the land of smooth and straight, cry out of the TV. She raises her fist past a brazen halo of naturally kinky hair, letting her fro fly loud and free, as if her hair said, I will not hide, I am trouble, see me now. Cheryl's cornrows, a puzzle of braids locked down tight. I run my fingers along the satin rope down my spine, wishing all the while best friends could look more alike. So I don't know, how many of you have parents who are from another place? Oh, quite a few, okay. How many of you have grandparents who are from a different place? Okay, not so far away. So one group is here for half an hour longer than the other. That's how I call the difference in the generations. So I'm going to take you traveling a little bit now, away from Queens. But we'll come back, because we always come back. We always go home. So I had this wonderful job. I should tell you, I was a travel writer, and I was actually full-time on a staff, and people ask me how you can do that now, and I don't have a clue, because I don't have that job anymore. My job disappeared, and I'm now working for a 22-year-old at USA Today. So, and my stories are a lot more superficial than they were years ago, actually. Mantras. She went to India to memorize, to study on bended knee, head bowed, to utter Om. Follow her breath, rise, fall, through the fine cilia that lines her nostrils, departing at the count of 8. Hushed whisper travels well, from nose to mouth and back, not unlike repeating the rosary, fingers following the chained circle, one bead at a time. Got my little schematic here. Love stuck. I jogged to the Borghese Gardens, past the zoo's furless creatures, bound up the steps to Cardinal Scipione's Galleria. Catch a glimpse of the Bernini sculptures, assuming their positions on pedestals, in time to gape at us studying them. They return breathless after a bacchanalian feast, careful not to stain their marble bodies with blood-rich wine. I imagine Apollo rushing Daphne, who will never be caught, in her desire to stay pure and free. Like nosy neighbors, the figures follow the drama, throw their heads back, recall yesterday's spectators peering up Apollo's crotch, wrapped by Daphne's fingers, metamorphosed into laurel leaves that clutch the warmest part of his smooth marble body, staking her claim forever. I've always liked that myth. It's very sort of modern. I belong to a group called Brevitas, and there's 2 more Brevitas members here, and we're an online circle, poetry circle, where we write poems of 14 lines or less, once or twice a month. Should be twice a month. And we comment on each other's work. So I have a lot of short poems that thankfully were honed is the word, right? She's a grammarian and wonderful proofreader and editor. So this is one of them. And this was actually based on a little story I saw in the newspaper. It was in the home section or something about decor. Hunger. After Dina's husband left her, the white walls seemed drab, invisible on some days. She painted the kitchen lemon, the dining room asparagus, the sitting room chocolate, her bedroom watermelon. Her mother-in-law thought it was her Italian heritage. Her ex-husband thought she was just hungry. Hi, nice to see you. So I guess I'm considered 3rd generation because my grandparents were born in Italy. Some people say that's 2nd generation. So this is a little piece. Every time I visit my cousins in Italy, there are questions about, whether or not it was such a good thing for your grandparents to leave. And it's a hard question to answer because you don't want to be totally honest because they're your cousins. L'Americana, the American. The women's talk moves to women's talk. In your clothes, they can't be from America. Real Americans wear pink and blue and socks with sandals like the Germans. Nice. New York is not L'America. There, the national color is black, but not for mourning, I try to say. I don't look like a real American because inside, I remain a Mediterranean hybrid with the suspicious heart of a peasant on both sides of the Atlantic. So I'm going to do a little bit more about women because this is the Women's Poetry Initiative. So this is one woman who goes to Cuba. Un beso en Cuba. Back with your right, forward with your left, cross-body turn, press her. Let her know it's coming. Ahora, enchufa. Johnny Pacheco swings a ritmo cubano. Smutty studio windows, the wooden floor pale and polished under dancing feet. Sliding, stepping, pounding, turning. A door slips open. Cuban couple whose feet are loving the moment. Let her foot get in the middle. Your feet stay on the outside. Ahora, una vuelta. I look down at the pattern, un beso with his pelvis. His feet frame mine. Can lesson 1 get this sexy, this fast, and sultry Havana? So, when you travel, people tell you things that they don't tell other people because they think they're never going to see you again. So I sometimes get really fabulous things from people who expect never to see me again. And I went to Croatia, and it was not too long after the Civil War. And I had a guide. She was very good. And somehow I just got to get the nerve to say, so where did your family go during the war? Mad with fear. She stands alone atop a bleached white fortress overlooking the turquoise Adriatic. The dry Buddha wind brushes the heat of spring sun over her skin, a wind only nature could invent and usually saves for winter. Franica moved to Dubrovnik's old city, protected by tall, thick limestone walls. Not for a moment did we think they would bomb the old town. Not Napoleon, not Hitler did such a thing. Even when the bombs fell in the shelling hours, we slept sometimes for 16 hours a day. I have never slept so many hours, so much of my life just spent sleeping. Sometimes when we woke, we could not hear, we could not speak. Her pale, wide-spaced eyes sag at the outer corners, and I wonder if they looked that way before the war, before the shelling, before the long sleeps, before sharing 5 liters of water each day among so many who needed to drink or bathe. At night, we tied our wrists one to another so we could not be lost. Her head lifts, eyes lock on mine as if for the first time. And we laughed for no reason. Mad with fear. Kind of creepy, right? It really gave me chills when she said that. Okay. Now, this piece came from a story in The Nation. That's what it's based on. Sparrowhawks. They call us sparrowhawks, the smallest birds of prey at 10 inches. They prefer open spaces, but the human variety deviates, works instead in crowded urban centers, finds solace in anonymity, yet remain visible as hostesses or stewardesses in hotels, on ships, airplanes. These falcon family birds hover above intended prey, which is smaller still. Birds, spiders, reptiles, grasshoppers, crickets, mice, and caterpillars. Western women pity us, our men scorn us, and our sisters fear for us. The veil, illiteracy, genital mutilation. We seem hopeless, backward, astray. Men call them sparrowhawks of neocolonialism. Women who have unnaturally used their energies for materialism instead of as God intended. So this piece came out of, I'm sure everybody has pieces that come out of all kinds of strange things. This one came out of a dream, oddly enough. But one that I was able to capture a little bit. Sometimes you can't remember anything from your dream. They tell you if you have an interesting dream just to write something down as soon as you wake up. And the weirdest part of it is the key to be able to understand that dream. So this is more about first and second generation women in an immigrant family. I listen. I see them in a heaven steamy with kitchen vapors. Zia Kadutsa rolling her napkin into cigarillos, repeating her mantra, "No man is good enough for any woman." She had a bad husband, I tell myself. Zia Feile presses vanilla-scented pizzelle. Cugina Elisabetta beats an octopus into submission, cooks it pink, tender, drizzled with olive oil, sprinkled with oregano. Laughter. I hear it among them. I'm on the other side of the curtains, one of them sewed. It matches the tablecloths, the aprons made of remnants gathered from the sweatshop floor. I'm not allowed to banter. I'm invisible, but I see them and I hear them. Through the drone of my mother's lunch report today, I heated up the salmon you gave me. My knees are talking to me, so I stayed in, and I made myself a nice cup of coffee. I want to moan. I tune her out, yet I hear Zia Kadutsa's other mantra. You only get one mother. Mom says, I had a busy night last night. Everyone came. My room was full. The march of the unrestful dead. The husband, sisters, cousins. She says, my mother reminded me of all the things we used to make for Christmas. Stuffed olives, pickled zucchini, eggplant salad. You know how your grandmother was. I snapped to attention, scribbled down the recipes. And this is another little piece from my mother. It was my big idea that she should have a Eucharistic minister visiting her, so she would be at peace. I mean, she's 96, but she obviously is not intending to go anywhere. So she's not planning too far in the future. Well, she is actually. She is planning in the future, but anyway. This is one of the pieces in our dialogues, silly dialogues. Mama says, hey, Ma, you watching the Italian Americans on PBS? I don't know if I can do that. Why not? It's too long. You should watch it. It's supposed to be good. Good for what? They interview all the big shots. De Blasio, that Lydia, and she's not even Italian, and that Maria Bartiromo. Yeah, but it might be good. Nah, it's all the famous Hollywood big shots. What do they know? They never had any trouble being Italian. She obviously has some stories to tell us. Let's see. I do have one piece I really wanted to share with you. Now I'm wondering, in my colossal system here, what I did with it. It's kind of a new piece. It's not in the books. And it was, I thought, right on the top. Okay, we're not going to do this because I don't want to waste time. I did want to read this piece, which is actually about my stepson. And it's about prejudice. And it was published on New Verse News, which publishes things based on current events. And this was around the time of Trayvon Martin killing. Our date. My stepson spent the afternoon in detention for lying to a nun. I told him my name means pheasants in Italian, but nobody believed me. Half white, half Puerto Rican, Italian last name, nappy hair, said otherwise. At the perfect age of 10, my stepson and I had a date one afternoon. Determined to teach him to fly, forget the nuns, divorced parents, overprotective mother, just ride a bike. A two-wheeler, banana seat, shiny, chrome, bells, streamers. He'd run alongside it, throw one leg far and wide in time to find the pedal on the other side. I clutched the back of the seat, sent him off as far as I could, like my father did for me, knowing spills and harm would follow. Years later, a knot in my heart, his dusty, tear-smeared face, lips quivering, telling me of a quick ride to Pelham Bay, an Italian neighborhood, where he was chased down by taunts of, "You don't belong here." I tried to tell them my name, but nobody listened. I think of all I don't know about courage, how to build it, pass it on, when to fight, when to flee, and when to leave your bike behind, save your life, find your way home. I had another short one. Okay, we're not doing that one. I alluded before to the fact that my father was a man who sent other men to the moon. So this came out of a piece. It started off about a gyroscope, which most people don't know what it is. I can't even explain what a gyroscope is, and I did research on it. But I'll try. He tried to tell us, 1969. My father brought home a palm-sized gyroscope to help us learn about space. Shiny chrome lapis lazuli spindle to match a midnight starlit sky. It wasn't a toy, the sparkling orb, or at least not one my sisters and I could fathom. It didn't seem to do anything. It just sat. Its forces rotating to the side, at its top an axle suspended in the air. My father said they used a dozen giant gyroscopes to keep the space shuttle on a course with the moon. Yo-yos and frisbees use the same technology as the lunar excursion module. We watched Dad twisting, testing, turning the gyroscope, but we'd shift our eyes to the I Love Lucy reruns. At all hours of the night, Dad could be found hunkered over the knotty pine bar my parents used for cocktail parties. Yellow legal pads scrawled with his fine cursive letters, written with sharp number 2 pencils, always in a plastic pocket protector to keep the points from smudging his shirt. One night he came home with a book held in place with toggle screws several inches long. Step-by-step instructions on how to land a man on the moon and how to bring him back. After he died, we found posters with cameo shots of the astronauts amid the dust balls behind the bar. Hundreds of signatures of those who worked on the first moon landing in 1969. We have yet to find his signature, but we know it's there. Found it. The reason I wanted to read this poem is because I just found out it's going to be published in Paterson Literary Review next year. Roses followed her across the Atlantic, buried deep in steerage. They survived, wild and common and hardy. Roses know their place on altars, in gardens, in pots, at weddings, at Virgin Mary's feet in May, funerals, wakes, proms, communions, christenings, night tables, bat mitzvahs, birthdays, recitals, and readings. Rose, Rosa, Rosina, Rosenblum, Rosmarina, Rose, Rose, Rose. Wild and common and climbing. Warring roses, whining roses, guns and roses. Roses planted by night in one corner, replanted the next day in another. Two men's silence their passion to determine where the roses will go. They kept the roses in motion, like lost immigrants in South Queens. East, west, north, south. The plant's thorns got stronger. The buds got brighter. A battle of wits and wisdom. Father-in-law, son-in-law. Who owned the house, the garden, the rose? One fired by a peasant's instincts, the other by new ideas, in his new house, in the new world. Roses, wild and quiet and cultivated. And I'm going to close with this piece. I find that big events in your life, sometimes you can't write about them very quickly, but deaths feed you because they spark memory, they spark emotion, and you should just keep writing about them until you're done, because you never know what's going to come out of them. So my dad died like 10 years ago, but every once in a while something else comes back to me, and I feel there's sort of these little gifts that have been left for me. One for another. Trying to remember how he sounded the last time we spoke, it comes back to me, the almost inhuman sounds he made with his shiftless, ragged tongue. I cling to a goodbye when his voice was strong, his words were clear and open. I realize I keep substituting one goodbye for for another. Thank you. You know, if it weren't for my family, I wouldn't have anything to write, right? Actually, they never disappoint me because there's so much, you know, there are so many stories. But there is one family member that I have not given one of the books to because they couldn't possibly not recognize themselves. There's no way. But, you know, you have to do it. You have to write what you know, and then you have to then you try to apply that and transcend what you know and bring that to the things that you don't know so well, but you use the same principles. And I don't know, it's just, you know, hey, you're going to talk to me, it's, you know, it's available. If you're going to tell me something, it might be public. But, I mean, I've actually never written anything that was really scurrilous or really, but I have written about, I've written family secrets. And some of them read them, but hardly anyone ever comments. It's very funny. My sister is also a poet, and my brother was visiting my mother, and he looked at my sister's work, and he said, "Oh, I'm not even mentioned," which is funny because it's really not about him. But okay, him being the oldest and the only boy, so you know there's sort of a prince quality in there, So I said to my mother, well, leave my book there because he's in it. He's got 3 poems in it. And she said, oh, I don't know. I said, no, you should leave it there and see what happens. But I've never gotten any comments. But, I mean, no one's ever confronted me about it. So, and my mother loves to tell her stories, you know, being 96. And fortunately, she can still remember them. So, you know, it's a little dicey, but I think everybody uses their families, unless they're not interesting. But mostly families are interesting. There's stuff. Unless it's a purely happy family, then it might not be so interesting. But usually you have a few characters in the family that really feed you, or they just have sort of, you know, lives that you don't lead. So they're really different from you. You know, and you'll never lead. I mean, I certainly will never know what it's like to get off steerage and find myself in New York City, not knowing the language. I've never, you know. I mean, you do that when you go to a foreign country, but you know it's not permanent. You don't have to stay there. So that feeling of foreignness is something that you can touch a little bit when you do travel, but only a little bit. You know, so those stories are very valuable. I also think they're important to document because most people's lives, they're considered ordinary people, right? I mean, we're considered mostly ordinary people. We're not, you know. And those are the lives that go undocumented. And they're really significant, you know. Because someone didn't win a Nobel Prize doesn't mean you should really overlook that person. Almost everyone has a story, you know. So I think it's important to save them in a way. Some of these have been, you know, people ask you how long it takes you to write a poem, right? And sometimes something's been percolating in your head for years, like 30 years, you know, like you remember something from your brother and your sister or or a friend or some kind of extreme loss that you felt that you couldn't really name or articulate. About it. So I write a lot of stuff. I read a lot of stuff is long. And then I leave it there for a really long time. And then I try to find what the sort of the white core of the story is. Like why I should care about that moment. And then again, why should anybody else care about that moment? And will that moment be similar enough to somebody else's experience that they can get something out of it? You know, it's not like I write for an audience, but you know, I don't want my material to be so specific that it only applies to me. You know, like the immigration theme. That is so common. Everybody's like an immigrant. You know, it's New York City. And who's not an immigrant? I mean, to run into an American is like the unusual thing, you know. And all these immigrants have that immigration sensibility of moving and finding a new place and adapting. All of that is really interesting to me because it's done with so many different accents. And everybody gives us a piece of their culture. especially in New York, even if you just taste the food, But you know about Diwali because it's the Feast of Lights, and it's in the fall. It's right next to Halloween. And so, and it's kind of like looking at comparative religions. East Indians have like a lot of gods. Well, Catholics have a lot of saints. You've got all, it looks different on the outside, but there's such a deep commonality among us. It's hard to imagine that people can't tolerate one another. But New York City, I think, is pretty tolerant of each other. People like the differences. So, I don't know. I look for the differences, and then I try to see where the commons are. I don't know if you know the phrase omertà. The phrase omertà in Italian is basically silence. Do not tell anyone anything. And they're very, Italians tend to be very closed, very, very suspicious of telling. And they don't like it at all. And actually, when I sit down with my mother or my father and I ask them stories, at first they say, oh, I don't want to tell that story. And then, once you start getting them to talk, they can't wait to tell you that story because nobody's been asking about that story. What you do with it later, it's a mix. The reactions are a mix. There's sort of a mix of pride because somebody thought it was interesting enough to write about. And then there's also, now the cat's out of the bag, now everybody knows. There are things I haven't written about yet, like how I think my cousin murdered his wife. That's percolating, that's only because he's got a daughter who is, who kind of knows that. And so that's something that I just feel like, am I going to write the poem of the century about that? Probably not, But there is that. And I think that holds people back from writing because they're afraid to tell. And, one person early on gave me the exercise of just pick out one person in your family that either that influenced you a lot. It doesn't have to be a positive person. It can be a negative person. And write about that person a lot and see what you get out of that because you might have other little stories and you can also fictionalize that. Once you have it, it's yours. Once you have it written down, you really have it for you. Even if you've had it in your head, it's really good to write it down because, as you write, you start getting more and more detail and more pieces. And and then it's like registering in the back of your skull. And every now and then, some new thing is going to come back to you because you've been visiting that space. And so, I don't know. Yeah, I do. I don't know. People without families, they probably write about not having families. What they imagine a family to be like. But that is, your first sort of system. But then, like when I wrote about Our Date, that was about my relationship with a stepchild, but also it was about trying to figure out how to educate a young dark-skinned boy how to navigate in the world. I'm not dark-skinned. I'm not him. He once, when we had a fight once, he said to me, oh, you can't understand me. You're not Puerto Rican. And I told him, well, then stop eating the mofongo I just made, Okay, fine. I'm not Puerto Rican. But, I'm here for you, and I know what you're going through because everyone has had someone hate them for who they are. And mainly it's because they're ignorant, And so that's common, And so I think there's a lot that can be pulled out. And, and if you talk about immigration, look what's going on. It's continually current, So having an immigration story that happened years ago and knowing that the immigration story is getting harder and more difficult, and yet our movements globally are increasing. We move a lot. People are moving all over the world a lot. So that's not gonna slow down. So, and I used to take notes on the subway a lot. I don't travel the subway as much. I tend to want to read now on the subway, but I always took notes on subways. And maybe they were garbage. You know, a lot of them are garbage. But sometimes you have a detail that you don't even remember that you wrote down. And it can spark, you know, a whole other piece. So beyond the subway. But anyway, thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience.